Hey guys, it's Cam from Craft & Tailored, and in this episode of The Details, we are hanging out with Schott. It's no secret that we are huge fans of leather jackets. I have more than one in my collection. It's kind of becoming part of the Craft & Tailored uniform. And in this series called The Details, we are talking about the auxiliary elements that are very much like watches, vintage watches, and things that are made with a craftsmanship and attention to specific details. What better way to dive into this series than to meet with Schott and talk about the specific details of an icon itself. So I'm here today with Jason Schott. So Jason, thank you for joining us and thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Yeah, so we are here in New Jersey. We're actually at the factory. And I thought it would be kind of cool to have a chat, talk a little bit about watches, but I've been obsessed with the brand for so long.
Thank you.
There is a tremendous history with the brand, and there's a ton of interesting stories behind it. I think, the black motorcycle jacket is not only a staple of iconic fashion, but there's also an element of functionality. And there's a common crossover with watches as well. Watches now are in this element of luxury, but they really didn't start out that way. You know, if you really peel back the layers of the onion about vintage watches, in many cases, it was a design element that needed to meet a specific request. Why don't we start by kind of talking about the history and the heritage of the brand and kind of start there, and then we can kind of dive into some of the details.
First of all, thank you for coming. We're always happy to show off the factory. It's something we're really proud of. And so we're proud of the fact that we're a family business here making jackets in the US, like we've always done.
Yeah.
My great-grandfather started the company with his brother in 1913. He started making fur-lined raincoats and selling them door to door, and eventually had a workshop in the basement in the Lower East Side of New York. And so now we're just outside of New York in New Jersey in a factory with, it's my mother, my uncle, my cousin, and I. There's still a Schott family member in the factory every day.
Schott is now it's a worldwide recognized brand. I'm a leather jacket, probably idiot savant now, but I look at something like, oh, that's a Perfecto, and we were talking a little bit about the similarities between leather jackets and also watches, because in watches, everything has kind of a reference number or a model number, and same thing with like a Schott leather jacket. A specific style has a specific number that's associated with the cut and kind of the feature set of that specific leather jacket. But the Schott brand and also the Perfecto name, I think, kind of has an interesting story. You're saying that your grandfather didn't really want the Schott name. He didn't think that somebody would buy a jacket with his name attached to it.
Originally, my great-grandfather figured nobody would want to wear a jacket with his name on it. So he came up with this label called Perfecto. It had a good name to it, and it was cut after his favorite shape of cigar. And that was originally intended for the entire collection. Over time, it became synonymous with just the asymmetric biker jacket.
Right.
And so, sometimes we have to remind people, but it's only a Perfecto jacket if it's made by Schott.
Right. So that's kind of the differentiation between the Schott brand and the Perfecto label, I guess,
Yes.
You could say. Okay. Schott was one of the first companies, I think, if not the first company, to put a zipper into a motorcycle jacket.
That is correct. So my great-grandfather was the first person to put a zipper in a jacket.
I mean, that's
So
a big
really,
deal.
he invented the motorcycle jacket.
Right.
The first motorcycle jacket had zippers. And just like you were talking about how watches had this utilitarian function, zippers were a really functional piece of equipment. I mean, at the time, zippers, imagine before they figured out how to mass produce them, zippers were incredibly expensive.
Totally.
Each tooth had to be polished individually, and then they put it together. So it was very expensive, but it was very functional in World War II. A lot of the flyboys, they were wearing these sheepskin jackets, and zippers were what kept them warm. I mean, the zippers were keeping the wind out.
Right.
Along with some heavy sheepskin.
Totally.
And so that was when zippers became more manageable. Was what the U.S. government saw this need for zippers during World War II, and they put in an order for 250,000, and then somebody had to figure out how to mass produce them.
Which ultimately made them more accessible to the general public, and that's kind of a cool thing too is like, you know, if we look at like a Rolex Submariner or, you know, some of these other watches, again, there's a functional element to them where it's, you know, rotating bezel on the outside of a watch now is very functional, or a chronograph, meaning, you know, the watch is a stopwatch. That's a very kind of common thing today, but those things were really important and served a much more functional purpose versus like, hey, what time is it? Let me grab my phone. I don't really need to check my watch today.
Sure, absolutely.
Right.
There's just a romance and a charm to the old materials. You know, the natural materials like leather, it gets better with time. It gets better with age. And so we're still looking back at these jackets that we made. You know, you're here in our archive where we're pulling out jackets. Some of them are 80 up to 90 years old.
And it's interesting, I think that, you know, some of these jackets, you look at them and they for sure tell a story. Like, there's only one way to get patina really, and it's to wear it and live in it, and it's just time. And I think that is another crossover point between, you know, a vintage leather jacket and something that is iconic like this, or maybe like a vintage Submariner or any vintage watch really, where each watch, even though they might be similar in production period, will ultimately look different depending on the life that specific item led. Bruce Springsteen, Schott Perfecto, Marlon Brando, James Dean, the Ramones. Like, this is a perfect example of, you know, something that is of an iconic nature living through a period in time and then also being sustainable. And that's something that I really like in my life. People are like, oh, Cam, you're driving, you know, your vintage Porsche, or, you know, are you really listening to records and that kind of stuff? And I really am. And the thing is that sometimes I think I'm confused with somebody that is trying to live in the past, and that's not the case. I'm trying to live in the now, but I'm trying to surround myself with these things that ultimately create an experience and create a feeling for me. And I don't get that in kind of the digital world. I get it from stuff kind of like this. And I think that this is a great example of that.
I agree with you. I think that you can tell when something just has been loved. And I think that's what we love so much about the jackets. And that's why they become more important to me after they've gone out and lived a full life. And then we can get them back. And it's, you know, something gone places where I could never have even imagined.
Right.
That's the best part to me.
Yeah, there's been some interesting watches that we've had in our collection, and things that I've also had like a tremendous historical value to them that we've, you know, sourced or found. And I think that energy is interesting. Like, we had a watch that had some really intense political provenance. And, you know, as I started to do more research on the watch, this watch was in this meeting with this person and that person. I'm like, this is kind of crazy that this kind of inert object, you know, there's no brain, there's no feeling, but this thing has been in all of these, you know, to be a fly on the wall, to be this watch, to be in those situations, to be this jacket, to kind of like live that. I think that there is an element of romance, as you were saying, and something that kind of invokes that feeling. 5 minutes, talk about your dad's Breitling.
Yeah, you can probably tell me more about it. I know what it means to me, but.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a Breitling, chronograph?
I think it's a chronomat, actually.
Yeah, I know the bullet band is kind of very 90s, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually really cool.
Yeah, you know, it's funny because my dad died, well, that's not the funny part. My dad died in a plane crash 25 years ago, and he was wearing this watch. I mean, this was the watch that he wore every day. And so I had to go and they wouldn't tell me anything happened on the phone. I was just sitting down to dinner one night and got a phone call that I had to come home. And then I got a phone call that something happened with my dad. I knew he was on a business trip somewhere. It was my grandfather's plane, and they wouldn't say anything over the phone. So I had to go drive from New Jersey down to Maryland before they would tell me what was going on, which is not
good, yeah.
A good thing. I can never put it on and not think of him. And so it's a cool watch and I love it, but it's worth more than...
Yeah, it's priceless.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It is priceless to me.
You know, it's interesting that, you know, your father wore the watch and now you wear it and you put this, you know, thing on, and it's a direct connection to your father. And you and I were talking a little while ago, we were talking about Anthony Bourdain. You know, we were talking watches and he was talking about a watch that his father wore. And he liked this association and kind of connection to the mechanical side of this thing keeping and telling time, but also being powered ultimately by, you know, his movements.
By his father, like his father powered that watch.
Yeah.
So this is the factory. Welcome.
Wow.
It's a little more impressive when everybody's here working.
Oh, I can imagine.
You can kind of get the idea. Everything starts from the back and it works its way up towards the front.
Okay. So this is the finishing area. As this is kind of where the process begins and it works its way through, I guess, the line, and then it ends up here, and then ultimately off to a Schott store or whatever. Yeah.
Wherever, off to wherever.
So maybe let's talk a little bit about this jacket. This is the Perfecto 70, or I guess they call it the Per 70.
Right, Per 70.
And a little cool thing too, David, sorry, I'm just like, is it in this pocket, the tag?
Oh yeah, the bundle tag.
One little cool thing too is like your reference number and your serial numbers are typically always in the pocket.
Yes.
So
right.
This is kind of cool. So the style number on this guy is, I guess it's a Per 70, right?
That's
PR
right.
For Perfecto 70.
Yep.
So one cool thing with the vintage Schott jackets, and some of the tags get worn out, but you can see in some cases like the serial number and the production date of the actual jacket by looking at the tag.
Yes.
And so this is a jacket that I was really excited about because I like jackets that take on a patina.
As the jacket wears in, you get the lighter color coming through.
Right.
And so we really like those highs and lows, the depth that you get in a jacket. And so that's what gave us the idea to do this jacket.
Yeah.
And we've got some of them on the floor, and you can see, I mean, I love just hearing you move around a little bit. You can hear that squeak of the leather. And, and that's very characteristic of vegetable tanned leather. I mean, they've been tanning leather for thousands of years. And basically, it's taking tree bark and grinding it up like coffee grinds and soaking the leather in this bark. And the tanning leather is actually the process of preserving it. This is the leather that went into making your jacket.
Right.
And you can hear that squeak. I mean, these are before they've been vintaged. And so you don't see any of that, except for where the needle holes are maybe. You can start to see a little bit of that later color crust poking through. This is the leather cutting area.
Okay.
Every jacket, we've got patterns throughout.
Got it.
Sometimes we can tell how old the patterns are based on the pattern board, the different colors.
Wow.
And so it really starts here with the matching table. This is where we're gonna lay out the skins, inspect them to make sure that the quality is good.
Something about, I mean, talk about patina, right? Like you just look at this. I'm sure somebody in their, Brooklyn apartment would pay an arm and a leg for a table like this, you know?
Probably.
Yeah,
yes.
wow.
You know, here we are taking hides of leather, and we'll throw them out on the table and we'll match it. First, we're inspecting to make sure that it's the right quality, it's got the right hand feel, making sure that we don't have too many damages. It can take years to get trained to be able to look at a hide and figure out how to get the best yield out of it. My great-grandfather used to spend a lot of time behind the cutters, making sure that all the pieces were, you didn't have any large pieces that could have gone into a jacket, because really the money was made or lost at the cutting tables.
Wow.
The cutters they have very few tools, all it is a little blade and a sharpening stone, and that's it, they're just here figuring out how to get the best yield out of their leather.
I think the cool thing too is like American manufacturing was such a big thing, and I think there's been a resurgence in it over the past maybe 10 or 15 years, but I think that's something that's very important, and I just think, this machine was made in Texas, like even the machine, I just think that's like really cool. But like, where do you go? What do you do? I think that's a thing that a lot of brands are ultimately struggling with, is like, okay, we do this like really iconic stuff and we do this stuff really well, but like, what else? And I think a lot of the top tier brands are really are trying to figure out how to maintain, an icon, but also it's like, how do we continue to grow the brand? What else do we do, right? And so it's cool to see you guys doing other stuff that is very much in alignment with what you're doing, but also progressively forward. And
we've definitely leaned into our heritage a lot over the last 10 to 15 years. And there were a lot of times where we got tired of hearing our story, you know, and we assumed that everybody else was tired of hearing it. But really, the truth is that nobody's tired of hearing our story but us. And so we need to do a better job of telling people. You know, there's a lot of people who still have no idea who we are, and that's our fault. So we have to do a better job of telling our story and building product that helps to reinforce the story. And so we're always looking for other things that we can do. We never get tired of creating new product, and being here in the factory is just such a great opportunity for us to play around with new ideas.
Well, thanks so much, Jason, for having us. I'm really honored to have been here. Huge fan of the brand, and very excited to be able to maybe tell the story a little bit and kind of give our followers and fan base kind of a more inside look at something that I think is so special. And to, again, kind of talk a little bit about, you know, the correlation to something that is what I do for a living, which is chase vintage watches down and get into those details. But again, it kind of transpires into other things as well. So thanks again for having us. I really appreciate it. And yeah, thanks.
Thank you for coming.